right, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Future Ear Radio. I'm really excited today to be joined by Annie Duchen and Amanda Fadden. So how are you two doing today? Thanks for joining.
All good, David. Thanks for having us today.
So excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's start with some backgrounds. Give your quick, I guess, background of, how you got into this industry, this profession. Would love to kind of go back to the start. So I'll let either one of you kick things off here and shed a little bit of a light on your backstory.
Why don't you go ahead, Amanda, and I'll follow you.
Thanks, Annie. Well, my name's Amanda Fadden. I am an audiologist by background and training. I think probably like many of us in the audiology field, my education started in communication sciences. Definitely sparked more interest from me in those audiology courses versus speech path. So it felt like a natural pathway to pursue my AUD following my undergrad. Audiology to me is more than diagnosing hearing loss. It's really just making those connections and just enriching others' lives, basically improving their quality of life. So I have a strong clinical background in ENT, where I was diagnosing hearing loss, treating patients with hearing aids, and I really enjoyed it. In 2022, I had the opportunity to join WS Audiology to work on a new market offering, which allowed me to still be impactful in the field of audiology, just in different ways. So I really enjoyed the journey of OTC. And yeah, I'm just passionate about helping humans hear better. And in my position now, I'm able to do it sooner.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Amanda. How about you, Annie?
Yeah, Amanda, thanks for giving the usual background of how we all become audiologists. Maybe we want to be speech therapists and then we don't. Or I think that's true for lots of us anyways. That was how my path brought me to audiology too. I started my career in pediatric audiology. So I did diagnostics and device supporting and fitting when appropriate for patients aged birth to 21. I always joke in pediatrics that you've actually worked with the whole lifespan, of course, beyond older adults, because a 21-year-old is functionally more like fitting an adult than a child. So I love that experience. And another thing I did in grad school and after grad school was some outreach trips for people in developing countries teaching audiology, like building a sustainable training program and fitting program. And the reason why I was so interested in that, along with pediatrics, is because I really care about getting people good technology in ways or places that they can't. And that's what led me to the OTC team overall. I realized there's a great need in our own space for adults to have better access to safe and high quality technology. So I've been on the WSA OTC team for 3 years. Well, actually, closer to 4 years now. I'm the head of sales and customer service for our team. And so help build out, that whole function of that team. As Amanda mentioned, this is an emerging market. That means it's an emerging team and partnership that we have with Sony, which I'll be happy to share a little bit more about. But basically, my passion is about people getting the help that they need. And my hope and now understanding of what the OTC category can do is supporting that, reducing those barriers to good options for people with hearing loss, which of course are the right candidates for these products.
Love it. Where were the humanitarian trips that you went to?
All in Guatemala.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was cool. I got to start as a student in that space. We would AUD students would go, and then I ended up leading the trips. You get to train as a student, you get to train students, and then you get to train local people. And the point, of course, is like we know with some of these sustainability or with some of these outreach programs, it's sort of like drop hearing aids and go. And so we were trying to build something more like when we drop the hearing aids and go, who can help, right? So that's just side passion.
So as we were talking about, before we started recording, I said, this is, I think, a really relevant conversation right now because it feels to me that, if you look back at sort of the trajectory of OTC, it's like, okay, so you had the PCAST report initially from, I think it was like 2016, 2017, or actually maybe even preceded that. I think it was 2015. And so then you had, sort of this like process of coming to market and all that. And so you had a lot of time for people to sort of process this and come up with their position more or less. And it just feels like we have I've seen this arc of the industry, I think, as any industry would, it's going to sort of, I think, initially look at things from a change standpoint. Like, okay, so here comes new change. And of course your mind can then go to, is this going to be a threat? Is this going to potentially cannibalize my existing business? Is this going to render me as a professional irrelevant over the course of time? These types of things. And I feel like what's happened is you've sort of had this progression of sentiment where people are now, I think, kind of the professionals are realizing that, look, this isn't something that's earth shattering. It's not something that's going to swiftly disrupt this whole status quo overnight. And frankly, it might actually be an opportunity. And so I really was excited to have this conversation today to understand that dynamic of, okay, we all know what OTC is here. We all know that this is not going anywhere, right? It's a whole new product category. I think it's important to note the distinction that the FDA did make in terms of what constitutes an OTC device and what constitutes a prescription hearing aid. These have been in the market for a little while now. And so I think I just wanted to hear from you all, like, what are you learning, in terms of how are the professionals responding to all this? Is this being met with trepidation, enthusiasm? Are people starting to actually include this in their offering? What does that look like? So tons of different directions that we can go with this, but I'll kind of kick it over to you to just say, that's the general observation I've had, is that we've kind of traversed this spectrum of, initially maybe people having a tendency to be a little bit fearful and defensive. And I feel like that posture is now sort of changing to being more receptive and open to this, as I think people are realizing, look, this isn't something that's just going to massively disrupt everything. And it's an incremental addition, I guess, to this whole dynamic. So Amanda, Annie, I'll kick it over to you too, to just sort of weigh in on that, of how you two are, what you're seeing from your position at Sony.
Yeah, for sure. I was in clinic, when the announcement of over the counter is going to exist by, year 2022. And it's a scary thing, right? So change is scary. I think a lot of audiologists don't embrace change swiftly. We are very busy clinicians, so I could only speak for myself, but when you think about something changing, it gets scary, right? So you start to think, okay, how does this change what I do on the daily? How might this change my clinic's, revenue? How is this going to change the patients that walk in the door? Um, and I will say that I think we were met with a lot of that resistance in the beginning, for sure. Clinicians thinking this is not going to be better than the PSAPs that already exist. How can this possibly help my patients? This is just going to create more work for me. Um, I will say, as the market has developed, there has been less and less of that hesitation and apprehension. I won't say that we have, every hearing care professional banging down our door for OTC devices, but there are a lot more hearing care providers who are definitely open to learning more about the offerings and, how it could enhance their clinic. We are not at all suggesting that OTC devices replace prescription devices, replace the hearing care professional. We know that that is the, gold standard of care. When I speak to hearing care professionals, I really try to convey that this is just an offering that your clinic should have, not a replacement, but a complementary service to what you're already offering. What did I miss, Annie?
I think that was a great overview. I I can add too, early on when I heard about OTC, I was a pediatric audiologist, and I think we are the most intense version of audiologists out there. So I couldn't even imagine. I remember from my perspective, I couldn't even imagine that there would even be a good or a safe option, right? Because all I could think of was PSAP, prescription hearing aid. And so with this category where the Sony hearing aids fall in this self-fitting category, which means you do an evaluation with the devices on to help guide the settings to be more personal and customized for the user, that's not something I could even have imagined. I also didn't imagine big players like WSA working with big players like Sony, right? Like I just imagined, I don't know, how would we even meet that need? Who is that person that needs this? And I think Amanda did a good job, explaining sort of that arc of what we see today. I would say we see everything from providers who still aren't willing to learn about it to understand the value, all the way to providers who are consistently and successfully offering OTC and everything in the middle. And I think, of course, that has to do with behavioral change. It also has to do with education and confidence, right? I know for myself, if I don't understand how a product works, I'm for sure not going to recommend it. And so there is a little legwork there as a provider to either invest a little time in training, or a little space to have a conversation like with someone like Amanda and I who can give you the quick flyby of like, here's what you need to know, here's how it works. Here's how we would recommend you offer it based on how your clinic works. And I think that's part of it, right? So you have to understand and learn how the technology works to trust it. Then you have to be willing to implement it. And so I think some providers, even providers, some who trust it, are worried about how to implement it. And that's why in our team, we intentionally spend time with providers talking about like, what's your goal for OTC? What's your priorities in your clinics, right? Can we find a way to have OTC strategically fill a gap for you, either for your patients or in your clinic schedule in a way that is not being satisfied with your current offerings? So as Amanda suggested, as like a complementary tool to what you're already using. And at a minimum, what we want to make sure, and it's why we don't just do one-on-one conversations with HCPs, we do a lot of things on Audiology Online and other training opportunities that are broader, because at a minimum, I believe that as hearing care professionals, it is our job to be able to explain OTC, to be able to discuss it with a knowledgeable sense of understanding, at least what is the difference between a PSAP and an OTC hearing aid and a prescription hearing aid. And then within that OTC category, because it's confusing, there's a lot of products out there, like I mentioned, that really range in price and quality that all call themselves OTC hearing aid.
Yep.
Right? Like hundreds of them. It's our job as providers to be able to say, and this is an OTC hearing aid, and this is why I would recommend X brand. I would recommend a Sony OTC hearing aid because it's self-fitting, it's built by somebody who knows and understands hearing aids. There's unlimited customer support. They have clear warranty and return information, like all these things that kind of tip off that this is a safe and high quality OTC experience. So if they're not going to sell it or offer it, I strongly believe it is still our responsibility to be able to explain it and to guide our patients. Because the truth is, if I have an office and I have someone come in who's a good candidate, they have mild to moderate hearing loss, say they're not ready for a prescription hearing aid journey, whether it's cost or time commitment or you name the objections we hear all day, right? If I don't give any input, they can literally walk into their car and order a hearing aid online.
Yeah.
Right? And how do they know what to choose? So yeah, I love to at least help people get on the path. And I think I feel like I'm going to have a little altruistic provider moment here. I feel strongly like that is our duty to at least, if we don't have the solution for them, or maybe we do decide to offer it, but even if we don't have it, we should be able to help get them going for the space that they're in.
Yeah, I have there's a quote, I've quoted this so many times in presentations. I'll see if I can remember it off the top of my head, but it's like, hearing professionals lamenting the dwindling price of like hearing aids, also need to recognize the basically like the value of being a provision of knowledgeable expertise, right? And I'm like, that's so on point with this role. I mean, really, at the end of the day, people come in to the door and they say, "I have this problem," and they're a lot of the time they're actually just highlighting a symptom. They're like,
Mhm.
"I can't hear my wife," or whatever it might be, and so you know that there's like your job is then to really determine like what's going on and then ideally match them to a solution. And so I feel like the one of the strongest arguments I've heard for why you should at least be involved in this is to understand that it's happening, right? And like you don't want to be absent of this whole like part of the offering, of part of what you could be provide, the provision of knowledgeable expertise. And so I look at this and I'm like, okay, this is interesting because, you obviously have um one of the themes that we've been talking on the podcast a lot lately is like this whole element of the changing buying behaviors, right? And so, like, I feel like it's a confluence of a lot of things. Like, first of all, you have just like generally speaking, everybody is more savvy at digging up information online. And so I feel like that's a marked change even versus 5, 10 years ago was you used to have a lot of people that came through the door and you were the first sort of piece of information that they were accessing. They knew that they were like seeking you out because you were the one that was going to guide them through this. Well, now with YouTube and with all the different things that you can access online, you can sort of self-educate yourself. And so I feel like, to just illustrate that is to say, if you have a patient come in, they're aware of the OTC offering and they have questions about it, and you are dismissive of it or you don't address those, then they're gonna perceive that as this person isn't as fully knowledgeable as what I'm sort of anticipating. And so not only are they gonna potentially go in their car and leave and buy the hearing aids on through their phone, but I feel like more importantly, it's diminishing the way you're perceived within your like local market. You want to be the expert for all this stuff. So even if your position is that, you know, right, here's a rundown of like some of the things about the Sony offering and maybe some competitors and all that. And here are ways that they differentiate. And, I only really deal in the prescription hearing aid world. And let me, kind of guide you to a way to access these OTC devices if that's the route you want to go. You still maintain that provision of expertise. And for me, like as more and more time goes on, that is what defines the value proposition is like at the end of the day, who is going to succeed in this world full of options, right? It's going to be the people that are ordained experts within their community, people that are saying, I have a real problem here and I have the opportunity to maybe go to Costco. I could try to do it myself, or maybe I just want to like go at the route of the expert, right? And so I feel like neglecting this diminishes that. And for me, I'm like, that is probably one of the reasons why I feel like you have to have at least a surface level knowledge of this stuff.
I think so too. And I think the important thing to consider, right? Like if you think about the fundamentals of a professional working with people, your first job is to create rapport with the person that walks in, right? Really hearing what is their problem and where are they in their journey. And I think, when we consider OTC, it's really a stepping stone, an entrance into the hearing journey. And so if you're, as a provider, able to meet that person where they are, maybe they are just looking for some occasional use, although our devices are designed to use all day, right? But from a price value perspective, they want occasional use of a product to them that doesn't feel like a $6,000 problem, right? And they just want to hear their grandkids better. I'm making something up, right? But something we hear.
Yeah,
If you
sure.
can meet them with a solution that meets the value they're looking for, it's a lower price point, but it's reliable for say they have mouth mounted hearing loss, of course, it's we're always talking about with OTC. Um, Eventually they're going to come back to you, right? They're going to want more from their hearing aids. Their hearing loss is going to change. Maybe they don't, but they move outside of the candidacy range of mild to moderate. And so if you can create that early rapport with the patient at the beginning of their journey and get them to do something sooner, which people do with Sony OTC, we see them adopting products sooner than prescription hearing aids, then that person trusts you. And when they're ready to buy whatever their next thing is, maybe it's another Sony hearing aid, maybe it's not. Maybe they want something with lots of programs and, different adjustments that OTC products don't accommodate. They're going to come to you. Right. And so I think it's also about understanding that patient journey and finding the balance of where they are versus like, what's your objective to try and sell? Right. And sort of meeting them in the middle, because otherwise you end up having people who just walk out. And some of those people will go do something else by themselves. They'll use all of our educational resources online and our online screener and help decide if it's for them. But otherwise, some people might do nothing. Maybe they got brave to come in for that first meeting and they kind of like weren't met with open conversation and they're like, it's actually not that bad. Right. So I think that's one thing. And then the one other thing to consider about OTC, is all the marketing around this OTC category has broadened the awareness of the hearing loss category as a whole. That is not just to benefit the OTC category, right? And that's something that we work with on Sony. Amanda and I get to use our audiologist perspective and say like, hey, we're not marketing experts, but we know that more people need to do something about their hearing loss. And for some reason, all of us big manufacturers haven't quite solved the whole puzzle of getting everyone to do something sooner. So can we use the power of a brand like Sony and Apple and Bose and all the other players who have entered this conversation with or without product to get everybody to start thinking about their hearing loss, right? And remembering only the people with mild to moderate are the ones that are right for OTC, but everybody else is still hearing and seeing all this advertising about like, hey, look at all these products. Hey, what's going on with your hearing health? And I think that's a huge advantage that the OTC category offers professionals and everybody else involved in the space.
I totally agree. I mean, and I feel like one of the things too, like the Sony brand is very powerful and it's cool. I'm curious, like um, let's get into, some of the successes, I guess, that you all have had. Let's talk about some real world scenarios of clinics that have embraced this. Can you walk me through maybe some of the advantages of what they found? I mean, is it impacting the patient demographic in any way? Is it opening the door to new types of patients? And, what are, like, I feel like that's like you've got a lot of people that I think are on the doorstep of this, of like, okay, I'm now willing to at least consider this. Can you kind of give me a pitch on why, either one of you, on why it would make sense to incorporate, having this as part of your offering?
You want to go ahead, Amanda?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So we see that our most successful providers are using it in, not the sense that we might see traditional hearing aids being dispensed. So using it as, mobile outreach. Maybe they have a mobile bus that goes out and serves the community, and it's an easy way to help those with mild to moderate hearing loss without needing them to return to the office for that traditional hearing aid journey. We've got some, clinicians who are starting to partner in the pharmacy space where, we have this group of pharmacy experts who are so used to having to discuss and recommend and sell over-the-counter products in general that it just seems like a natural segue for pharmacies to also offer OTC devices. And, by partnering with the pharmacy, an audiologist is not, being cut out of the picture in that sense, because there will always be individuals who exceed that category of hearing loss or, want a little bit more of that professional support, and having that partnership with the local pharmacy acts as a referral source. And then we also see that there are, hearing care professionals who are just selling OTC as backup options. So, maybe we have our super active patients who want to wear their devices while they're outside mowing the lawn or playing a sport, or they want to take them with them when they're traveling and leave their more expensive devices at home. That seems to also be another great way that clinicians are using this as a tool in their toolbox. Just one thing to call out is that a lot of clinics will also just use it as, they're selling these OTC devices but there's no necessarily, follow-up involved. So they're not tying up their clinic time to set up OTC devices or service OTC devices because it is, do-it-yourself product for sure. They can offer their services as another way to generate revenue, but they don't have to. They're still in the equation as saying, hey, this could be a good option for you. This is what I recommend. But then they're kind of, walking away and not necessarily needing to have the follow-up that they might with a prescription patient.
Something I would add to that too, thanks Amanda for calling those things out. And specifically in that last scenario, the providers who aren't spending all the extra time, it's because they're leveraging our Sony Here team. So our Sony support team is a 2-tiered team. Amanda is part of tier 2. So we have audiologists involved in that team so that if your patient buys Sony OTC and they have any question from literally unboxing to detailed suggestions on how to adjust the device, including counseling about being a new hearing aid user, a lot of our device users are, that's what our support team does. And that's unlimited care. So I think we don't brag about that enough. With super comprehensive care that they can access at any time. There is no expiration to it. The products do have a 1-year warranty, repair warranty. So that's something about how functionally supporting the products works. But we're always there to answer the phone and support it. And that includes that audiologist expertise, which is super helpful. So our providers that don't spend the time doing it, they know that there's audiologists on the other end if their patients need that help. Right? Which I think makes a huge difference and is not the standard of service for all OTC products. It's something that we were really intentional about because we know, as Amanda mentioned, like this is designed to be an independent journey. That's the point, right? But that doesn't mean people don't need help, right? We have younger people using our products, but we also have people who struggle just like with their smartphones, like we see in clinic all day, right? So we help people pair their phones, we help them get the settings set up, things like that. But we see people trip over in our prescription world all the time. And then the other thing I would mention is, which Amanda was getting at, is maximizing the value of OTC for the clinic. So some providers have the preference to be the only point of contact and support for their patient. And if that's the case, we encourage them to sell an OTC service package on top of the price of their product. And it matters because OTC, because it's independent, is functionally an unbundled journey. And so if you're going to spend time with your patient on OTC, great, charge them for it, right? Charge them for your time to make sure it's accounted for. It shouldn't be a free service that comes with the devices. What they get for free is us, and that's for free. And that's a lot. But if you're going to give your time on top of that, be mindful of it, right? That's one of the things that we talk about. And the other thing is, when you think about the purpose of OTC for your space, we have some providers who are really invested in selling the product. And we also have some providers who are more invested in sort of like seeing how it goes, but using it as lead generation to bring people into their clinic to talk about it. Because just because you advertise OTC doesn't mean it is the right choice for everybody who asks about it, right? And so it leads into new people walking in the doors, that Sony brand name, right? And of course, you have to be prepared to have that conversation we talked about, which is, what is Sony? How is it different from what you offer or from what I can get from Best Buy or Amazon, things like that. So I think we see a variety of different things. The one last use case I'll mention is that we often will train, if the clinic has somebody who's a non-HCP, like perhaps an audiology assistant or the person that supports with front desk, and that person has capacity, we have trained those people to learn how to talk about and set up and troubleshoot OTC products because in terms of like initial setup and usage, you don't need to be a hearing care provider. That's the point, right? Like people are supposed to be able to do it by themselves. And so maximizing the time of a non-HCP in your clinic if you have it to spare.
Okay, I'm going to try to process all that, and I'm going to try to, I'm going to try to like summarize some of the things that really stand out in my mind. So first of all, I think the fact that, going back to what I was saying earlier about, being able to sort of preserve your value proposition. And if your value proposition is largely rooted in your expertise in ensuring patient satisfaction, like the last thing you want to do is put them into a device that lacks the same standard of care that you provide. And then also being able to offload that though to Sony, knowing that there are going to be audiologists that are actually doing that. That's very comforting. But also being able to work with you all to train front office staff, very highly relevant topical thing going on right now. I mean, I know I'm sitting right here. I have a AAA, special invitation for audiology assistants thing that I know that's going to be a huge track at this year's conference is audiology assistants, right? Like that's a huge buzzword is how do you take front office staff and make them do more with them, right? And so I feel like all those are really, really positive. And again, though, I think that this whole notion of like, I just sat through a webinar where they were, it's not a secret. Like one of the most expensive and challenging parts of this whole business as a private practitioner is patient acquisition. So if Sony is going to help, provide you with new customers, new patients, they're going to help reduce your customer acquisition cost. That's a huge benefit too, right? So for me, I'm kind of going through this from the position of like I'm almost going to kind of take the other side of this from the sense of like I would think that one of the biggest objections you run into is, okay, like at the end of the day, I have my prescription hearing aids. And then so for whether it's the tested not fit or it's the new patients or whoever it might be, you've got this sort of second category that doesn't meet for whatever reason, they don't meet the criteria for prescription hearing aids. And so it feels like most people are opting for one of two directions. One would be the like older technology prescription hearing aids that are lower cost, that are kind of on the same price point, more or less, than an OTC device. But I feel like, what I'm sort of hearing from you all is it sounds like, you all are developing different ways to stand apart from that and bring value to the professional as this brand to justify why you should be that second option, why there are advantages to having that be at least have that as like one of the options for this second category is this OTC, because you have all the things that we just talked about, from the support to the customer acquisition and the way in which people are seeing ads for that. And then they're coming in through your doors, largely tied to all that. So that for me is like where I would imagine a lot of the status quo is right now, is that probably what you're running into the most is that idea of like, well, I typically just use, for those patients, I typically use whatever my preferred brand is. I used like the older generation product from three years ago that, now basically prices out roughly around the same as where this is. So that's very informative for me, but I guess I'm just curious to like hear from you too. Is that kind of what you're seeing? Is that one of the main objections that you hear is, with regard to OTC and the professional channel is, well, why would I do any OTC when I could just do all prescription?
Yeah. Go ahead, Amanda. And I'll follow.
I was going to say I've definitely seen that, in social media and in audiology groups, right, where people will say, I'm not offering OTC when I can offer, low end for the same margins, right? And as a clinician, yeah, I've done that too. When you have someone who comes in and, is very budget conscious, that might feel like the best route to go. But if we think about what we're sacrificing sometimes in those low end devices, we're sacrificing a lot of listening and noise. And we, as humans, are not in quiet environments all the time, right? So we see this demand for our hearing instruments to be able to handle these busy environments. And, for example, our E10 device was ranked as having the best, listening and noise. So why wouldn't you recommend something that's a newer technology, has better technology, and still keeping that, margin, versus something that is 3, 4, 5 years old, just to, meet your patient's budget where it's at.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Totally. I think, yeah, the technology is newer. OTC hearing aids, that's really what you were saying in a smart way, right? Like, but just to cut to the chase, it's newer. And of course, we can only speak to our technology specifically, not for the entire OTC category, but we really focus on those specific needs like listening and noise. Like that's what we know, where we know people struggle. So that's what we make sure works the best in our products, right? And I think too, I don't want to loop back and rehash, but it leans back into that behavior change, right? People also don't just choose prescription hearing aids because of maintaining their margins or that the margin is similar, maybe, but also because it's what they know, right? So it's probably in the mind of a clinician faster to fit an older technology hearing aid of the software they know than to take a 1 hour training on Sony OTC hearing aids and try to figure it out, like what they're going to do with it, right? But I think the important thing to know of like onboarding with these products, we have such a range of learning and training for providers. So if you have 15 minutes for us, we can teach you what you need to know about these products in 15 minutes. If you want more, we have up to hours and hours and hours of training and learning and troubleshooting we can teach you. So I think, in terms of barrier to entry for providers, it's that concern of like, oh, well, how long is it going to take for me to figure out this claim?
Totally.
Right. And so I already have this, or I can just call my rep and get, older technology. That's all faster. And so I think just reminding providers that we were providers too. We know that you barely have time to eat lunch, right? So we try to be mindful of how we spend our time together to make it worth your time and worth the learnings. The one other thing I want to add, David, which is not specifically related to your question, but I think is important, like if we just take a minute to zoom out and think about the broad impact of OTC, because I think as providers, especially providers who aren't talking or advertising or mentioning OTC, they feel like because no one's kicking down my door, this is not happening. We've said many times it's happening. I recently looked at some overall market data and just looking at like the impact of, if we look at not just hearing aids sold, but lives changed, so to speak, in the prescription market versus the OTC market. And this is in the US. So like in 2024, we estimate with a compilation of data that about 2.5 million lives are changed by prescription hearing aids. In 2024, about 1 million lives are changed by OTC hearing aids. And the growth rate of the market, of course, prescription hearing aids dominate the market. That's still true. And the OTC market is growing a little bit slower than we expected. That's also true. But if you think about the impact for people, right? And you think about the growth and trajectory, OTC hearing aids can have a significant impact on a very large number of people. They already are having this impact. So that is all to say, like, the way that people usually buy them is the easiest way to find them, right? And that's retail spaces. That's your Amazon, that's your Best Buy, that's your things like people who are putting money into advertising these things, right? That's just how it goes. How do people get news and make decisions about what to buy? But I think my call out here is like, we already see, although the OTC market is new and small compared to the prescription hearing aid, it's already having at least half the effect on the number of people in the US. And that's huge, right? If you think about it from the impact we can have as providers, we also know that there's not enough of us to solve all the hearing loss problems. There's just, even if we wanted to all work 7 days a week, which I don't think we all do, we couldn't answer all the needs of our patients. And so if we zoom out a little bit, I think it's about taking the perspective of like, we respect the gold standard and that's where we start, but we can't do everything by ourselves, right? And so what are the solutions that we can leverage to still help people in a way where they are in their journey?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this before. I'm not sure of many other supply and demand equations that seem as asymmetric as hearing loss to hearing providers. And it's interesting because, I feel like there's obviously, market share and there's like, it seems like there's, anytime I see like an HIA report or something like that, it's always about like, Sonova took another percentage of the VA share or something like that. But it's also rooted in this idea of like this pie is like pretty cemented into place. But it's like it does not sort of mesh with then the other macro level data point, which is how pervasive hearing loss is and how untreated it is. And so we're talking about like this pretty much consistent, up and to the right, incrementally growing prescription market, yet there's not, it's never going to be able to meet the actual needs of the market. And so like something very dramatic is going to have to happen for that to change. And, I think that the reality is like the AUD degree and programs aren't growing in a way that's going to match those two, you know, symmetrically. So it's like, okay, so how does this whole thing sort of square out, like this whole equation? And for me, I feel like it ultimately just comes down to the professional has to figure out a way to be more, they have to again administer that, they have to be that provision of knowledgeable expertise. And this is how I feel like you can go from 15% of people in the US having being treating their hearing loss to 30% treating their hearing loss, something that's like a dramatic uptick. The only way I really ever see that happening is if there is this like huge, massive surge in um, devices that don't require so much of I guess like this current model, right? Like I have to go and I have to see the professional, and then there's all these follow up appointments and all that. Um, it's just limiting the already scarce bandwidth. And so it's like, okay, so well, what could change that? I feel like we're sort of seeing the early beginnings of this where
Mhm.
it's and I think this is again the strongest argument for the professional is like the prescription market will remain for the foreseeable future. And those are going to probably dominate your time in clinic. But if you can become part of the broader conversation of these supposed million people, or roughly whatever 50% of the prescription market that are engaging in this more do-it-yourself model, there's just I feel like a tremendous opportunity if somebody can, if there's a way to more or less connect the supply and the demand in a way that is more conducive to the the reality of like one professional to a million people or whatever it is. So and for me it's like that, if you can like right now it might seem trivial of like, okay, I carry a Sony OTC product, but as that continues to grow and compound on itself, you're just going to have more and more people that are aware of all this. And so that was the point I was making early on, is to say the last thing that you want to do in this emerging market is to remove yourself and say, I'm not really a participant in that. I'm only focusing on the prescription market. Because the reality is like here in 2025, that it might be the case where like, you only hear about somebody mentioning OTC, maybe one in every 10 or 20 patients. But if that continues to grow and grow and grow, I worry about the professional potentially, sort of removing themselves from this whole dynamic of where a lot of this whole patient journey now begins, where it's like people can intuitively understand, I probably need to go see a professional. And there's a lot of market data that suggests that that first step is it's such a big obstacle for a lot of people to there's a lot of, you know, emotion wrapped up in that. There's, you're coming to terms with the fact that maybe you have, quote unquote, like this lifelong disability. And so I can understand why it takes so much to get somebody in the door the first time. And I feel like what OTC is kind of ultimately addressing is making that first step more palatable. But it's a journey, as we all know, like it's a progression. And so if you're not part of that first, segment of the patient journey, how would those patients ever know that you're, like that they should go and see you for these next steps along the way? And that's what worries me a little bit about this, is that it's not to say that you have to be like, selling all these devices and all that. But to your point, Annie, I do think that you need to be aware of this emerging market and like, kind of what exists and what people are seeing online and in the ways in which their perceptions are being shaped.
And thinking about too, like, you know, WSA, right? Our bread and butter is prescription hearing aids. And we have offered OTC in addition to that. So as a partnership that also has a primary business that focuses on prescription hearing aids, I think it should be important for providers to understand, like, this is supposed to be extra to help you do extra for your business, obviously, right? Because think about what our primary bread and butter is. And so I think the call out here is exactly what we've talked about, which is that we care about growing your overall business and the overall number of people you support. And OTC is one more thing to do it. And I think too, like to your point, David, as things change, and we could probably have a whole spin-off conversation about this, but I think, and as a writer myself, like we lean into what we're most comfortable with as a profession. We tend to do this and kind of really dig our heels down because we've done a lot of things, like we've tested hearing the same way for decades, right? And not saying there's a different way, but it's just like how audiology is, right? It's like kind of old school and how we do things. And I think we should really, as providers, be challenging ourselves to think about what is happening with technology in general. How is AI affecting hearing aids? What are the new categories? What are the new ways I should be offering these things to my patients? Like, if we just stay on our little path of prescription hearing aids, I think we're missing the opportunity of technology advancing all around us. I mean, what do you think, Amanda?
Yeah, I completely agree. So even if we, zoom out a little bit and look at how we just how some hearing care professionals are really just diversifying themselves in the community. We have professionals who are offering remote care, who are offering mobile care, who are specializing in, some of those parts of audiology that not everyone does. So I completely agree. I think as a profession, we're on this, narrow path. A lot of it, probably boils down to this is what I know. This is what I had time to do. I don't really have time to look at new innovative ideas, but I really think that to survive in our world as audiologists, we need to open up our blinders and see what else is out there. How could we innovate our practices? What can we learn? And to a point, if we're only prescribing prescription hearing aids, right? We're still constantly having to learn about what's new. What is my preferred manufacturer offering now? What are they launching next week? How am I going to integrate this into my practice? Oh my goodness, these are more expensive. How am I going to, quote unquote, sell this to my patients? So adding in, OTC as a service is really no different than learning about new products that our preferred manufacturers are consistently launching, right? So yeah, I agree. I think the smart, savvy audiology practices are going to just continually have to innovate and just really embrace what's new and what's out there and just do all the things right to survive.
And maybe just one more thing I'll add is like we shared some of the use cases where we see success, right? But there are also lots of things that we're trying every day with providers. Like we have providers who are like, I want to try this thing with a pharmacist. Have you guys ever done something like that? And we're usually like, something similar, but not something exactly like that. So we are partnering with hearing care professionals who have creative ideas, whether it's partnering with someone else in the community or wanting to offer OTC in a unique way in their clinic. And so if there are providers out there that think like whatever we just described doesn't quite fit the bill of what you want to try with OTC, let us know, because I think it would be naive of us to say that we have all the answers in this brand new market right now. I think we have a lot of initial answers and ideas and paths we would direct you on if you came to us saying, what should I do? Certainly we could guide you, but you know your practice and your patients the best. So if you come to us and you say, I have XY need, could we try this thing? We'll probably be like, yeah, let's try it, right? And let's learn from it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but my point being, we're spending a lot of time partnering with hearing care professionals to work through new ideas and see how they impact their patients and their practices too. So we can also hold ourselves accountable to the growing of, while we have this innovative technology, the growing and understanding of how can we implement it in creative and actually helpful ways for hearing care professionals.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of options out there for OTC, options, right? And I feel like kudos to WSA for this approach because I think that it's, you know, twofold. Like one, Sony's a really cool brand that I think I can imagine a lot of professionals being excited about the opportunity to dispense that brand and the all of the like sort of secondary effects that you can a lot of the benefits of that, like I was talking about with the customer acquisition costs and all that. And then I also think that having this like really big focus on audiology. Like, this is kind of like the OTC offering for the audiologist by the audiologist. And I think that's a really cool distinction of like the is helping people to understand that, look, we don't know how this all is going to look, right? We don't know where all the opportunities are. We have building blocks here that we can play with that are different than the prescription building blocks that you have. They're complementary to them. And so I feel like all of this it's a really exciting time because it is like, it feels very much like, when I see and talk to you in like a year from now, it feels like you're going to have a whole load of new use cases and updates of how people are finding success with this because it's sort of impossible to really know. You're just equipping them with, the building blocks to maybe get savvy. So as we come to the close here, I just want to kind of understand, for anybody that's listening that wants to take the plunge, that wants to do this, walk us through how, like, what is that first step? Are they reaching out to one of you two? And then what does that look like? Can you just kind of walk us through that onboarding journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, why don't you go ahead and I'll fill in some details.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that, the biggest benefit of working with us is we are a small team. So you're going to talk to Annie or I. And yeah, like Annie mentioned, we're so open to just new and creative ideas and how to make this really work for your practice. So you'll need to be a Signiat or a Widex customer. If you're not already, don't worry. It's very simple. We will get that set up for you. And then from that point, we'll discuss a little bit about what our product offerings are, what that MSRP might look like. Really talking about your goals of your clinic and understanding, how OTC can be a tool to really help you meet and exceed those goals. We have a ton of training, like Annie mentioned, that we can offer you. We can offer your staff. We have marketing materials that we can offer you. And I think one of the biggest pluses is there are no kit minimums. So you do not need to commit to X amount of units to utilize our services.
Yeah, I think well summarized. I mean, the point is you get in contact with one of us and we're happy to share our contact information, David, in whatever way that makes sense for this forum. And then we make a plan for you together. And like Amanda mentioned, and I touched on earlier, that could be a very brief plan, depending on your time and capacity. It could be more extensive, multi-stage learning plan. It's really about how much time you want to invest in implementing it. But we could give you everything you need to know to get started in 15 minutes. So starting off with that conversation and then sort of jumping off based on what your needs are and your wishes are for implementing and learning about Sony OTC.
It's awesome. It's really cool. I just, I like I said, I feel like we've been on a little bit of a, uh, progression in the sentiment from it being something that people maybe were perceiving as a threat. And I think now a lot of that has dissipated. I don't hear many people talking. If anything, they're talking about managed care. They're not talking about OTC anymore. And so I just think that I think now we're sort of at this point where, it's obviously sort of it's established as a new emerging market. There's real demand for this. We know there's a ton, the total addressable market is big. And I feel like that we're gonna have to augment the prescription hearing aid market with the OTC market in order to really fully address the the sheer pervasiveness of hearing loss that is only seeming to just get worse and go younger. And so I feel like OTC jives with that too. Is like it's just something that really I feel like resonates. Like a Sony device has some serious brand power with the younger generations too. So I think there's a lot of advantages for professionals to engage. Again, even if it's not to go full bore like selling the devices, but just having a good understanding of what exists, what's out there. I think there's advantages to that. So closing thoughts, I'll just kick it over to either one of you and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I think I'll just wrap up with saying, we love the opportunity to have conversations like this because I think it's important to see some of the faces and the brains behind these ideas. And Hopefully now, for those who are listening, have this concept of like Amanda and I were clinicians. Where did we come from? And I can speak for myself that if I didn't believe in the safety and efficacy of this product for who it's for, I would not spend my time doing this all day. Probably was clear based on my history of being a pediatric audiologist. I'm very ethical. Um, and so I think it's just helpful to see who's working on this and who directly can you get the help from when you have the questions about OTC. We have a ton of information on the market in general and how it's developing. And so if this conversation leaves you with even more questions, we're happy to just be OTC resources for information, help empower you with that knowledge. And build up your confidence to, like we've talked about over and over in this conversation, but just have the confidence to talk about it with your patient. So we're here for conversations about sales. We're here for conversations about OTC as we learn and grow in this space. And so just opening that door for us to be a resource to those of you in the HCP community who are looking for just more clear information about what's going on and how it works. Anything to add, Amanda?
I think that's a great summary. I will add that, as in my position, I not only get to work with HCPs, I also work directly with the end user. So just want to give you a boost of confidence that your patients are in great hands with me and my colleague, Katie. We do a lot of counseling on the phone that we've done in clinic. So your patients are in great hands. And I guess the only other thing that I'll close with is in talking to, our end users, the Sony name is so powerful. There are so many customers who have purchased this device just because it is a Sony device. So, take with that what you will. But just like Annie, if I didn't believe in this product, I would be at House Clinic, I am sure. So thank you for taking the opportunity to let us share our message.
Absolutely. Well, Annie, Amanda, this has been a really awesome conversation. I appreciate you two coming on today. Thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end, and we will chat with you next time. Cheers.
Thanks, Steven. Bye.